Good evening, everybody. And on behalf of Invest in Latam, it is a pleasure to welcome you all to this new edition of Conversations with Victor Muñoz. To end the year, we have organized a series of 3 conversations with leaders and successful entrepreneurs in the area of technology. To this, I want to give a special thanks and appreciation to Spencer Stewart that has helped us in this effort. And quite frankly, within the Spencer Stewart team, a special thanks to Estefania Henao in Bogota and to Norton Lara in Sao Paulo. The 2 of you guys have been really instrumental in helping us put together. So thank you very much. Tonight, I have the pleasure to have with me a very successful entrepreneur, but more than that, really special human being as I get to know him professionally, personally. It's great to have Santiago Suarez with us tonight. Santiago, welcome to Conversations.
Thank you, Victor. Delighted to be here.
Santiago is Colombian. He studied abroad at Yale University. Has had different positions, but I'd like to highlight his experience at the bank at JP Morgan. And he's one of the co-founders and the CEO of Addi, a very successful fintech in Colombia that is now opening offices in Sao Paulo and taking the next step, which is internationalization of their business. So let's dive into the conversation right now. The first thing I'd like to ask you a little bit, Santiago, is why to be an entrepreneur? Having been an entrepreneur myself, I know that being an entrepreneur sounds very sexy, but it's really not sexy at all. It's really high risk. A lot of startups, perhaps the big majority, are not successful. So you just lose money, you get angry investors, you get disgruntled colleagues who come to an end. So it's a high risk bet. Then you work a lot, you overwork, you sleep little. And finally, in my view, you get a lot of bosses, right? I mean, your investors are bosses in a way, your employees are bosses, your customers are your boss as well. So why to be an entrepreneur? Why did you choose that, Santiago?
Yeah, so I would agree with you that being an entrepreneur is not sexy. So usually when people ask me, hey, should I be an entrepreneur? I always tell them this should be your last option, not your first option. So as it's usually the case with advice, do as I say and not as I do. But I was going to say, and I think my wife said it best, I decided to become an entrepreneur because I couldn't have a boss anymore. Little did I know that by not having one boss, now I have multiple bosses, as you say, and a recurring joke at Addi is, you always have a boss, right? But no, I think one of the things that I've been privileged and lucky in my career has seen a lot of experiences, right? I had the opportunity to work with legendary leaders like Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan, not so legendary leaders. And at some point you start saying, I would do things differently. And I wouldn't do this. And I think this doesn't work this way, it works the other way. And eventually you say, you know what, if you have so many ideas about how to run a company and how to do things better, why don't you put your money where your mouth is and take the plunge and do it? And I think it's a combination of that interpersonal drive with the second piece, which is the desire for impact. Because one thing that a company, and let's call it an emprendimiento or a startup, can do, it's an incredible vehicle for impact. Look at Nubank, look at Rappi, look at Facebook. I mean, it's tremendous to think that Facebook 15 years ago was used by less than 100,000 people. And now it's one of the most powerful and high impact organizations in probably the last 100 years. So I think if you, like me, are a little annoying when you have multiple opinions how to do management, and on top of that, you have a desire to have impact, then the benefits of being an entrepreneur outweigh the cost. But you got to go in eyes wide open. And the last thing I'll say about being an entrepreneur is exactly what you say. When you think of entrepreneurship, which is the press releases, these conversations, the funding announcements, the IPOs, etc. It's a very small part of being an entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur is in the trenches, pushing email, pushing customer calls, pushing decisions, and that's how you make innovation happen. You don't make innovation happen like in a big lab with beautiful whiteboards.
That's very true. That's pretty true. Santiago, let's talk a little bit about that process. I don't think people wake up one day and say, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I suppose, at least in my case, something that was building there. I made a decision, but I realized I was not ready. I needed to do other things. Both professionally, I needed to learn things, develop my network of contacts more. Financially, I wanted to have certain position. How was that process for you? How do you start to think, okay, I'm going to be an entrepreneur? Did you think, okay, I need to get A, B, C, D done, I need to learn? Or you just took the plunge and you swim if you can? How was your particular experience?
Both, actually. So I took the plunge 10 years ago. In 2010, I partnered with 4 PhDs from MIT to do an artificial intelligence company. And at the time, I really thought that was the last job I would ever have. We had this beautiful, ambitious vision, as you're wont to do. And we said, we're going to change the way computing works. And it was a grandiose idea of changing the way computers work at the most fundamental level. And I was so excited. And I got into it because I was doing late stage venture capital and I wanted to be on the other side of the table. So I eventually met these guys and this is it. So I joined as, employee one, business founder, as they call them in Silicon Valley. And we did everything wrong. Like if you could tally up a list of things that we did wrong, like you could do wrong, we did all of them wrong. We didn't have a good customer development program. We couldn't fundraise accordingly. We didn't have a product. We had pretty bad founder relationships, the whole thing. I think at the end of that experience, I basically took stock and I said, wow, I really enjoy this. This was great, but I have no clue what I'm doing. And I'm not a brilliant engineer. I'm not a brilliant designer. So if I'm going to do entrepreneurship, it's going to be from the business side and I want to get trained. And that's why I said, well, I drew up a list of 10 CEOs that I thought were great. So Jeff Bezos, Jamie, Steve Wynn at Wynn Resorts and Casinos, Costco. I said, if I can find the opportunity to work in a way that allows me to learn from these folks, this is going to be great. And that's going to be my training ground. And that's why I joined JP Morgan. It was with the view of saying, this is an incredibly well-run operation. Why don't I go learn about incredibly well-run operations? And maybe one day I can run my own. And it was a combination of that experience at JP Morgan, then moving back to the West Coast, joining Lending Club, that you just start saying, okay, I've done investing. I've seen how a great CEO works in the case of Jamie. I've seen how a great institution works in the case of JP Morgan. I've seen the other end with YC, and you kind of like start checking some boxes and you say, okay, now I'm ready to go. So a friend of mine calls it fancy entrepreneurship, and I think she's right, because I basically, after taking the plunge, as you're wont to do, and failing miserably, I then said, okay, next time we're going to increase the odds of success by doing some prep work. So that's what I spent doing 7 years, a lot of prep work. And then I took the plunge again. It's a very different story.
Look, one of the things that I wanted to accomplish when we started this idea of the tech series of conversations is hopefully to encourage people to become entrepreneurs, to create new companies, to develop the economy, to develop new solutions to old problems, to create jobs, right? And in that sense, you touch on a couple of points that I want to highlight for those people who are thinking of doing something like that. Number one, I coincide with you, the importance of having mentors is extremely important, whether it's a boss, whether it's a friend, but then you need to be humble. Big mistake that I've seen many times is you're very arrogant. You think you can do it because you've been successful before, but be humble. Accept, hey, those guys know a lot of stuff that I don't know. Get close to them as you did. You're going to learn a lot of stuff. Accept positive criticism, advice. That's a key point of the things that you mentioned. And the other one is, look, you want to be an entrepreneur, let's face it, you're probably gonna have more failures than success, right? And so get ready for that. Psychologically, know that the chances are against you, that most probably you're gonna fail once, twice, several times, and hopefully you will get to a success. So those two things I believe very, very important of you, what you just mentioned. So let's move a little bit to Addi. The first thing that I like to say is, in the audience we have very, very different types of professionals, from the high tech kind of people to the less techy, less tech experienced people. So please tell us in very simple words, what is Addi all about? What is it that you guys do?
At the very simplest, what we do is we help retailers sell more. That's very simple. How do we do it? By giving their customers, so the people on this forum, for example, the ability to buy on credit. So say you want to buy a fridge, and the fridge costs, I don't know, $800. What Addi does is it allows you to pay it in over time. So maybe 10 installments of $80, maybe 4 installments of $200, making sure I get my math right. And that's all we do. We allow retailers to offer credit programs in their stores and online, critically, so that when a customer wants to buy something and either they don't have a credit card or maybe they have a low limit, they're able to buy it. And we do it immediately, 5 minutes, no paperwork. You take whatever it is you want to buy, you're super happy with it, and then you pay us monthly.
Mm-hmm. In that business model, and when I think about a credit, at least the old way, you think of going to a bank, filling out a lot of paperwork, in a way demonstrating that you don't need the money, so you get the money lent to you. You demonstrate that you're very low risk, and that's a process that takes days, if not weeks.
Yeah.
In some cases. I know that you guys approve credits in less than 5 minutes. How do you guys do it?
It's really what it means to be a technology company in my view. I think a lot of people, when they think about technology, they take the process and they just say, how do we put technology on top of the process? But they never rethink the fundamentals of the process. I'll give you an easy example. In Colombia, there are a lot of fintech companies that still have manual underwriting. They have people looking at credit files. That doesn't sound very techy to me. So what we ended up doing was we look at the process soup to nuts, from the moment a customer needs a loan to the moment a customer gets the loan and gets the goods that they want. And we said, what is it that we need to accomplish at each step? And can a machine accomplish it? And then if so, how do we do that? And a machine is just very generic, right? I mean, a machine can just be a beautiful user interface that we put on a website so that you can do what we need you to do as a customer without having to speak to someone. But a machine can also be an algorithm and a financial model behind it that takes, in our case, over 100 variables in less than a second, makes a decision, and then says yes or no. So it's really something I think we did quite successfully at JP Morgan, for example, which is take the process, figure out what is it that we want to accomplish, and then is there the technology there to be able to do it? And that's what we do. So we do this beautiful, fully digital process, and we're able to take every decision and say, how can a machine make this decision, or how can a machine help a customer make that decision?
Excellent. Santiago, we just said that more startups end up in failure than in success. Tell us about the history of Addi and why has Addi been successful, unlike most startups?
So I would caveat by saying we're not yet failed. I would say we have not yet succeeded. And I think one of the things you always see when you speak to people is everyone that has succeeded, even when they have succeeded, they're like, oh, this is like Jeff Bezos says, this is day one. And they run $1 trillion company. We're nowhere near there, but I would say it's very early days for us. I think we have accomplished a couple of things, but we have not yet succeeded. That being said, I think the reason we've been able to accomplish what we have accomplished in the first 2 years of operations has been a combination of great timing and luck. I always tell people the same entrepreneur that failed then ended up building a gigantic company. So I think timing and luck are huge components of your success. And I at least find both solace and despair in knowing that fact. But from there onwards, we've been very focused on people. We have a culture of ownership. I think we're one of the very few companies in Latin America where we offer stock to everyone. So from the people answering the calls to the founding team, everyone has shares, everyone gets equity. So we never talk about employees, we talk about a culture of owners and colleagues, which I think has driven meaningfully more engagement, commitment, and output. I think our focus on technology and UX that we have talked about, and then just the team we have built. Excuse me. We have built an incredible team, people from the UK, the US, Brazil, Argentina, come together and executing at high speed for the first 24 months. And that, by the way, the last thing I'll say is, and you mentioned this, right? Learning. I think, as we've talked about in the past, I do a fair bit of investing on the side. And what we look for, and what I look for when I'm investing, is not, does this person know everything, but can they learn quickly? Because your biggest advantage as a startup is how fast you move and how quickly you learn. And I think in our case, we've been able to do that, and we have moved meaningfully fast, but also we have learned a lot. And this year, my God, have we learned a lot. I mean, we were a lender focused on retail in the middle of the craziest pandemic of the last 100 years.
Now, couple of things here. What is the future of Addi? And again, I know you guys are opening offices here in Sao Paulo. So what is the future? And then what is the definition of success for you and for Addi?
Let me take them in reverse order. We spent a lot of time with my co-founders talking about what success meant for us. Because we call ourselves the accidental entrepreneurs. Because I think, like you said at the beginning, we realized how difficult this journey was going to be. They were like, oh my God, we're going to go in knowing what's happening. But secondly, because to us, a big motivation to starting Addi was we wanted to work at a place that we were happy to be at. I think a lot of people go to work and they're like, you know what, I hate that guy Victor, or this guy Santiago, I really don't like, or Jesus Christ, the lunch situation here is a debacle. And you spend more time at work than anywhere else. You spend more time at work than with your wife, than with your family, with your kids. So a big reason why we started Addi was we want to build a great company to work for. Now, as I like to say sometimes, a great company to work for is not a nonprofit where we're not going to ask for great results, outstanding outcomes, and amazing colleagues. But a great company to work for is a company that you're happy to be at. So one of the things that we do at Addi, for example, is we spend a lot of time training leaders. We partner with the Conscious Leadership Group, this really cool organization of kind of executive coaches and leadership coaches in the Bay Area in the United States. We train our leaders on conscious leadership principles. We spent a lot of time talking about how we live our values, integrity being one, kindness being the other one. So for us, success is, can we build that conscious workplace? Can we build that place that is a place to be delighted by when we go to work 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now? And I would say we are quite unusual that for us, economic success is important, but this is as important as economic success. And, as we talk about often, if Addi succeeds in its external mission, which I'll talk about in a moment, but we become a place that is not true to our values, not true to the type of place we like to be part, we wouldn't consider that successful. And a lot of the stuff we do as a founding team is, how can we keep our internal compass focused where it should be? Because the external pressures are many. And the external mission is quite exciting too. which is powering and enabling digital retail across Latin America through financing. So we're able to make it possible for every Brazilian, Mexican, Colombian, Argentinian to buy what they need when they need it because they have access to fair financing. I'm going to be delighted. As long as we do the way that's call it the internal compass, and we're focused on how we get there as much as where we get there.
Okay, excellent. Santiago, let's move as time goes by. I want to move to another topic, one that is tough, but is absolutely necessary in a startup, which is fundraising. Perhaps one of the most difficult activities, I guess, especially at the beginning. Later on, depending on how well you do, is the opposite, right? But let's talk about the goods and the bads. What factors take you to success in fundraising? What are the biggest mistakes that you've seen done in fundraising? And then I also want to talk about how do you choose the right investors for your startup? So not every investor is the right person for you to be in. But let's start with the goods and the bads. What have you seen, and what advice do you have to potential entrepreneurs or already entrepreneurs who are in the middle of fundraising?
The first advice is probably meta advice, which is define what type of business you wanna build. And I'd be curious to hear your experience, because you have fundraised for a very different type of business than my business, right? And your fundraising looks very different. You go out and you speak to sovereign wealth funds or private equity folks. Invitation Homes being a great example, this Blackstone-backed multi-billion-dollar company. They raised one quote-unquote round. They diluted themselves by 80%, something that venture people will tell you never to do. And then they took the company public 3 years later. So I would say my first advice would be figure out what type of business you wanna build. Because the worst thing you can do is get Dam or Blackstone involved in a venture business, or get Sequoia or Andreessen Horowitz involved in a cash flow business. That just blows up in your face quickly. But assuming we're talking about venture capital, let's say, assuming we're talking about startups, which is where I spend all of my time, the first key to success is know what the market clearing price is. Everything else goes from there. I'll talk about a couple of things you can do tactically, but the first thing you should know is what is the market clearing price? There is one, even in something as opaque as venture capital. So I'll give you an example. If you're an enterprise software company, if you want to raise a Series A, you need to have probably $2 million of annual recurring revenue. You probably need to have positive unit economics, and your customer lifetime value should be at least 2 to 3 times your customer acquisition cost, with a payback period of 6 months. And that's the market clearing price. So do you know that price, and can you hit it? If you cannot hit that price, with very few exceptions, you'll be able to fundraise. There's always the exception, but by and large, there's a standard that you gotta clear to be able to fundraise. So know it. If you don't know it, like, you're gonna be playing blind, and your investors won't. And then the second thing is craft a story. It is a sales job. I think people forget that the same way that an investor is trying to sell you on taking their money, you're selling them on investing in your company. And you have to treat it like a sales job. So build a CRM, build a story, figure out what your quote unquote customer, in this case your investor, what are their pain points? Are they particularly quantitatively oriented, and they're going to grill you on cost of capital, unit economics, return on equity, etc.? Or are they big picture oriented, and they're trying to figure out how are you going to expand to Nigeria in the next 24 months from Colombia? And knowing that, you can tailor your sale. And the last thing I'll say is run a process. And running a process is terrifying for entrepreneurs. And I say it out of personal experience, but the best fundraising I've seen is you run a process. And you've seen it probably in your line of work, right? You hire a banker, and the banker holds your hand and says, we're going to set some deadlines. And as the company, you're terrified. You're like, well, what if no one likes me? And because of the deadline, I lost the one opportunity. But the banker will tell you, if someone's interested, they'll hit the deadline. And if they're not interested, this is a great way of making sure you don't waste your time. I don't waste my time. So build a process. Kevin Ryan, and I can share the notes later, has a great blog post where you literally like stack all your meetings in the first week, give people this amount of weeks to do due diligence, signal from the very beginning, I am expecting term sheets, which is a magic word in venture land when they give you what they want to invest in at what terms. You say, I'm expecting term sheets during this week. And give them time to do their diligence. But that is how I've seen the best fundraising process work. It's scary because you lose control over the process, but it really optimizes the outcome. I think on the flip side, if you flip it, like what are the biggest mistakes? I would say the big one is obviously not knowing market clearing price. The second one is not recognizing, it's kind of the flip ones, which is not recognizing that this is a sale process. But probably the third one is not recognizing, and this is something I see particularly in Latin America, because until very recently, we didn't have a lot of capital options, that Latin American CEOs were always kind of in pseudo fundraising mode. And that is highly distracting. Like fundraising is obviously the CEO's number one job, but it's not the only job. You're also setting vision, setting strategy, hiring the right people, communicating, recruiting, and fundraising is incredibly distracting. And I see a lot of folks, particularly here, that don't have the discipline of saying, I'm in fundraising mode, I'll raise, close fundraising, wait some time, I'm in fundraising mode, make it happen. And instead they like it, and part because it's exciting, right? It's the deal adrenaline, it's the people want to talk to me. Having that discipline is really, really important. And then in terms of how you choose your investors, it's tough because everyone tells you, oh, it's like a marriage, so go date your investors before you marry them. And in an ideal world, you won't take money from people that you don't know ahead of time. So you build relationships in this business. Our first check was from Andreessen Horowitz, and I knew Angela was the partner that led the deal. I've known her for years. So that made that relationship very, very smooth. So I would say how you choose your investors, try to meet them, but that's not always possible. So if that's not always possible, get references, and particularly founder references. It's so easy to figure out where they're invested. Just speak to fellow CEOs that they have backed. And you can just be like, how was Victor? How was Victor when times got really tough? Do they stick to their commitments? I think venture capital is an industry that, because of its rituals and everything, relies on a lot of unspoken norms. Like I used to joke, like when I was on a trading desk, you always knew the other counterparty was going to try to like really take as much advantage of you as possible. And lawyers were critical and agreements were critical. In VC, there's a lot of unspoken norms, and as a result, people can easily break them. So knowing, are they going to stick to the norms? How do they think about these norms is critical. And the last thing I'll say is be mindful of your stage in your industry. So if it's the first Latin American deal, just make sure that they know what they're getting into. I mean, Brazil and Colombia are not the United States or Switzerland. If they have never invested in marketplaces and they always invested in enterprise software companies, the margin profile of those businesses looks very different. So if they expect you to run 90% margins 3 months out, you're going to have a very unpleasant board conversation. So try to figure out, can they add value and do they know what they're doing? But I'd be curious on your end, as I said, you come from a very different side of both entrepreneurship, but also investor side. What would you say have been the biggest learnings in terms of how to pick a good investment management partnership, so to speak?
Yeah. Santiago, let me say a few things about fundraising, because I've done fundraising for larger companies, for funds and real estate, etc. But for our conversation, I'd like to focus more on startups. And I help startups to get initial seed rounds of money. And I like to say, I look at four things generally, and that gives me an initial idea. One is the opportunity. Is this something really big, or is it a smaller kind of niche type of thing? And that to me already leads me as to, am I on or not? Then the second thing that I look at is the business model. And I'm very old school. I like to see business models that throw cash, right? I hate them.
That's very old.
Yeah, maybe because I was an entrepreneur during the internet bubble, and at the time, people valued websites and companies by the number of clicks that people would do there. So some of them I know had the whole family doing clicks all day long to increase the value of their company. So I'm very old school. I like to see business models that generate cash. Of course, you're raising money. You need to inject money into the company. It needs to grow, but you need to have a sense that at some point this is going to generate enough cash so that it's going to have enough value. So that's important for me. The third thing is the landscape. What are their competitors? Are they just the first one doing thing, or are the second? How, the landscape is very, very important for the success of a startup. And the last one, which is the most important for me, because it can influence and change everything, is the team, as you said. The people, are these guys capable of turning around a bad situation? Can they find new opportunities within the reasonable space of business? Because of course, if you're starting up a restaurant, don't come back tomorrow and tell me that you want to take this restaurant into an airline, right? But within a logical space, can they find new opportunities? Because many times a door closes, but others open. And so people are the ones that make things happen. And to me, in the end, the team is the best of them all. So that's what I would say there. And then in terms
Team,
of
Victor, what would you say is something that you really pay attention to? Obviously, integrity, etc. But is there something that you're like, gee, now I have learned this is really critical, especially in early stage companies versus, let's say, big energy companies or whatever?
Look, it's extremely subjective, but after almost 20 years of working in investments, number one, despite the fact that today I probably do 99% of the meetings online, I like to meet people personally. Why? I'm old school. So I sit with people, and if I get a good feeling, I want to go with them. But let me try to put those in more objective terms. Arrogance, that's a killer for me. You want person who know a lot, who understand very well their industry, but who are not arrogant. Because arrogance kills business in many ways. Kills business because they don't see what's happening, because they're arrogant, because they do not appreciate a threat that's coming up because they're arrogant, and because you don't interact effectively with your stakeholders, whether it's your colleagues at work, whether it's your investors, whether it's your clients. So arrogance, the most minimum trace of arrogance that I perceive in an entrepreneur, I generally step back. And it's not for me. It might be for other investors, but not for me. And the other is this person energetic enough? Because as we said at the beginning, entrepreneur doesn't sleep, is overworked, have many bosses. This guy has to have a lot of energy. And finally, you have to share values with that person. It has to be honest. He wants to want to do this. Of course, we all want to be successful financially. That's a given, right? That's where we're in business. But he wants to do things right. He wants to use success to help other people succeed. He wants to make a contribution to his society, to his country, to his neighborhood. That kind of things are very important. And I'm a firm believer that what goes around comes around, right? And the company is doing the right thing, etc. It somehow comes back to the company. So those are the things that I look at: business model, and then at the people themselves. So, but very interesting to hear that. That's a conversation that could take some hours.
Yeah.
But let's move now to a completely different topic. As I mentioned, in the early 2000s, I was an entrepreneur in the internet sector, etc. But since then, I've always believed that Colombia has all the resources, has the right environment to become a hub for technology, for development of software, for development of new technology companies. And I say this because Colombia has a hardworking human resource. It is indeed. Colombian professionals in their majority speak English. And here, I don't want to offend anybody, but the reality is if you want to do business at certain level, you want to internationalize your company, you're going to have to speak English. We're doing this live in English so that our friends in Brazil
English, exactly.
Yeah, so that our friends here in Brazil can get it better than Spanish, because we have obviously audience in the US, etc. So so that's important, and I think Colombia's got that. And Colombians are very creative and resourceful people. Then there's the economic side of this. I think Colombia is a cost competitive place. I analyze and compare how much does it cost to develop an app in Silicon Valley these days. What is the cost of a CEO in Silicon Valley these days versus the same things in Colombia, and really have an advantage there. Your dollar gets way farther. And then the country has a market size that's interesting. We have now 55 million people according to the last census, I guess. It's not a huge market, but it's big enough to create a company that gets a size that matters. And then, just like you guys are doing, go international, because company that is not thinking to go international, I think is a company that then is destined to be smaller. And so I think the market is ideal for testing, being successful, get ready, and then go international expansion. So all those things make Colombia a very interesting place for potentially developing a technology hub. What do you think about that? You are now in Bogota. You're clearly plugged into all this environment. How do you see this as a possibility? What are the initiatives, and what are the right ways to help this happen?
So I would say I agree 100%. Let me start by saying I completely agree. I would even add a couple more, let's call them ingredients to the recipe. One is geographic location. You're 3 hours from Miami, 3 hours from Mexico, 2.5 from Lima, Sao Paulo. You're really in the middle. Boom, you can get to Madrid. Geographically, it's a very friendly location. And from a time zone standpoint, it's also quite friendly to the business. 2 hours from Brazil, same time as Mexico, East Coast time or Central time in the US. So those two things are very, very important. And the last thing, which I think as fellow Colombians, I never thought I would say this, macro stability. If you compare Colombia with pretty much any other country with the exception of Chile, it's pretty stable. Inflation is stable, politics are stable. So all those things, I think, make Colombia a very attractive place. As we think about what can we do to make it happen, the first thing is train more developers. And I was just I had the privilege and quite the experience of serving on a little council that the government created in June to launch what we call Mission TIC, to train 100,000 developers in the next 24 months. Because right now there is a big gap. Some companies would even say they have 50% demand versus supply. So the first thing is, how can we train more developers? And there I have to commend the government, because they're doing an incredible job at saying we're going to train not 10,000, not 20,000, 100,000. And that has the support of folks like myself, Apple, Amazon, etc. The second thing I think we need to do is what the Rappi guys say, you got to believe in your story. Like, I'm going to use a very Colombian expression, which is matar el tigre y asustarse con el cuero, which basically means you do all the hard work, and then when you're there, you kind of freak out and never cross the finish line. And I think one of the things that Rappi has inspired all of us, entrepreneurs and Colombians, is we can actually build great companies. So we got to believe that. And then the third piece, which I think is the one that has changed the most, is have role models and mentors and structures that help you create these things. If you look at Argentina, for example, Argentina even today, 20 years later, and they've had multiple macro crises and currency crises and Lord knows what else, remains a hotbed of development and entrepreneurship, Globant, etc. Why? Web 1.0, Terremate, Mercado Libre, all these great companies were built there, and they had all that know-how. We had the problem, which is that when Internet 1.0, Colombia was, as you may remember, going through a very difficult time. So we missed a little bit on Internet 1.0. So all that institutional knowledge we don't yet have. So one of the things that gets me the most excited is, okay, you have all these great ingredients we talked about. We've got a government that is committed to training all these developers. Then how can we, and we, I mean, folks like you, folks like me, who have that experience, whether it's in Brazil or in the US, how can we start bringing that experience to accelerate and catalyze learning and catalyze those developments? And I think if you do that, it's fantastic. And I would even say, you don't even need to build for the Colombian market. There was an announcement 2 weeks ago, actually a few days ago, of a company called Lean Staffing Solutions. They just received $40 million from FTV. It's a Colombian company. And what they do is they run trucking dispatching and customer service for American trucking companies. So if you are Walmart and you're coordinating all your trucking needs, it's probably a dude in Barranquilla that is doing that right now. Or if you're Target or Costco. And they do it with technology that they have built here. They have a workforce that's bilingual, as you mentioned. And they had never raised venture before. Beautiful story. And they just received a $40 million ticket or $50 million, crazy amount of money. And to continue to expand the business. Because I think, when I think about Colombia, I think a lot about Israel. Like, Israel is not the biggest market in the world, but they've been able to build this thriving tech ecosystem because they test the things in-house, they do their things, and then they export technology like it's somebody else's business, which is really, really cool. So yes, I couldn't agree more with you. And as you can tell, it's a topic that gets me very excited.
So Santiago, obviously this is not a surprise. We've spoken about this over the past few days. I am launching the creation of a group, probably 5 to 10 people, that will, in a systematic way, analyze, one, how can we help that happen in Colombia? How can we make Colombia be a hub for the development of technology? And 2, execute on the results of that analysis. And we're going to do it, as I said, systematically. We're going to go to regulations. Do we need changes in our regulations, in our laws? And second, what do we need in terms of training, education? Do we need participation of universities, even of schools, high schools? How can we expose more people to successful or more experienced entrepreneurs, CEOs, so that they learn from them? Can we create, series of conversations? Can we create mentorship programs? Can we, right? How can we, just like what you mentioned, have more technically trained people in the country who will be a resource, but at the same time could be leaders in the creation of new ideas? How we bring more venture risk money to these startups. And again, go systematically, do the analysis, but not the kind of analysis that's going to take a year now, but very quickly, and then more move into action. So I want to invite you formally to participate in this group and help me create that agenda and bring more key people to that effort.
I'm delighted, absolutely delighted. I think it's a relevant topic, but more importantly, I mean, that's the reason I moved back, right? I always say that solving problems here is way more interesting than solving problems in the United States. It's just you have more impact. So I think it's an incredible initiative, and sign me up, count me in.
We'll do, and now you're part of it. You cannot escape. I know where you live. Okay, very good. Santiago, we are now in the last few minutes of our conversation. I think we've touched on a lot of interesting points, but I think a lot of people look at you as an example to follow in terms of entrepreneurship, etc. What message do you have for our audience in Latin America? Of course, we have a big audience in Colombia and in Brazil, but we also have people in Ecuador, in Peru, in Chile tonight, in Mexico, and hopefully, or not hopefully, I know that friends in Europe and the US will be looking at this, especially in Europe, will be looking at this tomorrow, given the time difference with Europe. They will be looking at it tomorrow. What message do you have for those professionals, for those potential entrepreneurs, for those young entrepreneurs that are already at work? What can you tell them at this point? The floor is yours.
I'm going to go with an unusual. I'll try to go away from the traditional work hard, follow your dreams. I hope people will work hard and follow their dreams. I think the biggest learning is ignore the hype. It's so easy to get caught on, am I doing the thing right? Gee, competitor X seems to be doing quite well. Look at this company over here. And what you end up realizing is one of the benefits of being a private company, and the reason why doing entrepreneurship is so much easier as a private company than as a public company, is you only get to disclose news whenever you want. So we only talk about news when things are going great. And Addi does it, everyone does it. So what you don't see is the late nights. What you don't see is the existential moments of crisis and loneliness that characterize building a company. And it's only when you peel the onion, and I've been lucky enough to be backed by some of these people who have been doing it, and to have built a group of friends or folks who've seen it. And as one of my mentors said, he sold his company to Cisco for close to $1 billion almost 15 years ago. He said, when he invested in IT, he said, congratulations, the only two emotions you'll feel in the next 5 years are euphoria and absolute despair. And the lack of sleep will enhance them both. So what I would say to everyone who's listening and wants to be entrepreneurs, I would say, no one ever talks about the despair. No one ever talks about the fear. No one ever talks about the loneliness. It's okay. And it's a sign that you're doing things well. And it's a sign that, to Victor's point, to your point, you're stopping, you're questioning, you're asking, you're human. And I think celebrate that humanity and celebrate those moments of doubt and crisis, because that's where you succeed, and that's where you thrive, and that's where you grow as an entrepreneur. And those are the moments that will make it worth it, even if the company is not successful, because that's where you learn. So I just want to say, celebrate doubt, celebrate crisis, because that's where you grow. And that's where you look back into and say, wow, we did that. That was pretty cool.
Very good. Santiago, thank you very much for your time tonight. Thank you very much for conversations we had over the past few days. I wish you and Addi the best, although I don't think you guys need it. I'm sure I can see you guys going in the right direction. The expansion in Brazil for sure is going to be a very, very important step for the company, given the size of the country, given the differences in culture, etc. So no doubt that that's going to be a great addition for Addi. And to the audience, I want to say as well, thank you very much. I'd like to say a quick recap of valuable things here. If you want to be an entrepreneur, think that, number one, you're into a company. A lot of people think, oh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, and I'm going to be a serial entrepreneur, and I'm going to generate a company every year, every 2 years. The reality, in average, stay in a company for 5 or 10 years if you're an entrepreneur. So that's have in your professional life. So keep that in mind. Number one, being an entrepreneur is a long-term commitment. People don't think about it that way, but think about it. Now, number two, get a mentor or get mentors. Don't be arrogant. Keep a lifestyle that will allow you to go through this marathon. Being an entrepreneur is not a sprint. Being an entrepreneur is a marathon. Surround yourself with your family, with your mentors, with good colleagues, etc., and be ready to go through what Santiago was just saying, all these difficult moments, and don't get into despair. Exactly. Think about it. That's where you will succeed. It's not easy, but it's very rewarding. And if you achieve success, you will not only be handsomely rewarded economically, but I think most importantly, it means that you're leaving something for everybody else. You're leaving a company that is making money for investors. You're leaving a company that is making foreign money for the government, and that money has to go somewhere for education, infrastructure, security, health. You are contributing to those things through a successful company. You're leaving a company for employees, colleagues, right? You created jobs, and you're helping those families develop, etc. And hopefully, you're leaving something for the environment, for the community. So, being an entrepreneur, I think it is really cool, but in different ways from the way many people think that is cool. Being an entrepreneur is cool for different reasons. So, with that, I'd like to close, say goodnight to everybody, and we hope to see you very soon in our next edition of Conversations with Victor Muñoz. Thank you very much. Thank you, Santiago.
Pleasure. Thank you. Good night.